Hi everyone, welcome to the latest in our series of question and answer sessions. Today I'm joined by Professor Richard Brazier, and Richard is Professor of Earth Surface Processes here at Exeter, and he's been working on a unique research project to reintroduce beavers to the UK 400 years after they were hunted to extinction. And just last month it was actually announced that the beavers that had been introduced to East Devon as part of this project would be allowed to stay permanently after a 5-year trial. So welcome Richard, thanks very much for joining me.
Well, thanks very much, Emma. It's a pleasure.
Now, can I start by asking, why is the beaver such an important animal for the environment?
Well, we call it a keystone species, the Eurasian beaver, and by that we mean it's a species that manipulates the environment to its own advantage, but in so doing also does a lot of good, brings a lot of benefits for a whole range of other species, including humans, which live within the ecosystems which it formerly inhabited, and of course it was removed from. And so the second point of importance about this animal is that because it was removed from our ecosystems, hunted to extinction primarily for its fur and its castoreum and its meat, we lost the engineering, we lost the activity that it brings to an ecosystem. We lost wetlands, and in fact we accelerated that loss by draining our land primarily for agriculture. We lost therefore lots of water in the environment, and of course when we lose water from an environment, especially in a drying climate, we lose life. Without water there is no life. And so the beaver is very important in maintaining a balance in an ecosystem, at least in a natural ecosystem. So if you put those things together, when we bring them back, we see how important it is now, and we see a return to more naturalised ecosystems when the beavers are present.
Brilliant. And beavers have been reintroduced to a couple of locations in Scotland, I think, and a couple in England. How do you choose locations to reintroduce beavers?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, just to recap on that, you're absolutely right. There was the Scottish beaver trial. There's the Devon beaver trial, the River Otter beaver trial. They're two licensed wild reintroductions. There have also been releases or escapes of beavers in other places, like
Okay.
Speyside in Scotland, and other parts of southern England. But the question about how you choose is a good one. I think what you're after, if you want to try and study what these animals do, especially in a landscape or ecosystem that has changed quite a lot due to human activity, what you're after is good habitat primarily. And by that I mean good food resource for the animal, because of course you don't want to be releasing beavers in a landscape that's depleted in terms of food, because they would not survive, or they would not be healthy. You need a landscape that of course has some water in it, which the beavers can manipulate. You need a landscape ideally that isn't too conflicted in terms of, for example, lots of heavy infrastructure. As you can imagine, if beavers build dams and push water sideways onto floodplains where there's, I don't know, let's say critical rail infrastructure or
Yeah.
roads or a sub power station, you're going to cause a lot of conflict straight
Yeah.
away. So you have to have in mind both the positives, what are the good aspects of the environment that you're putting these animals into, and what are the benefits that could accrue, but also what are the potential conflicts. And ideally, you wouldn't be reintroducing beavers into places where immediately you're going to get conflicts, which you then would have to manage and deal with.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned conflicts there. How have people responded in the areas that you've reintroduced beavers? Have they been positive or?
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority of people are super positive. I mean, overwhelmingly positive, which is something that really surprised us as researchers. We ran a national survey, for example, to undertake a kind of to quantify an understanding of the perspectives on beaver reintroduction, and well over 95% of respondents, there's nearly 3,000 respondents, were overwhelmingly positive about beaver reintroduction. More locally, in the River Otter catchment, we've had some challenges to deal with. For example, beavers building dams in places which weren't very helpful flooding a few farmers' fields, for example. And I guess the initial response of those landowners was, well, this is a negative impact. You know, this affects my livelihood. And working especially with Devon Wildlife Trust, we completely acknowledged that, worked with those landowners to mitigate the problems, to manage the heights of water in the channels, or to, in some cases, remove beaver dams so that the land wasn't flooded. And so what we actually found is, even when you get a negative conflict, it's very straightforward to manage that conflict. And in those case studies that we've now written up, what we see is quite a turnaround, and basically more understanding around what the conflict was and the negative impact was accrues for everybody, including the landowner. More understanding about how it can be managed occurs. And then we get ourselves to a situation where even people who are negative about beavers, having learned more, generally tend to be positive about them after that kind of conflict. So I guess we've used those conflicts as learning opportunities, and that's been also overwhelmingly successful.
Brilliant. And what have you seen in the locations, such as the one in East Devon, in terms of the beaver population? How have they settled in, and how are they developing?
Well, I mean, very often you don't see anything unless you really know where to look. You know, if water's deep in a river, for example, more than half a metre, 70 centimetres deep, beavers don't feel the need to build dams. They're normally triggered to build dams when water's shallow, because they want to feel safe from predators. Not that there are any natural predators left anymore in the UK anyway, but the key thing there is, most places where beavers set up their territories, they build bankside lodges, they burrow into banks to enter those lodges underwater. But in most locations, they don't build dams. So unless you are, you know, an avid wildlife spotter, or you spend a lot of time on the riverbank, you're not even necessarily going to see the animals, as they're nocturnal as well. And then secondly, you know, when they do build their dams, they're often in small tributaries and streams that are tucked away down in the bottom of deep valleys, wet woodland locations, which are often not used by farmers or other people anyway. So actually, yeah, the first answer is you don't see a lot of impact. Where you do see a lot of impact, in places where there's maybe public footpaths and such like, so you can access the stream side, you're going to see things like dams right across even the smallest streams, pushing water sideways onto floodplains. So widths of streams can increase from just half a metre or a metre or two wide to tens of metres wide.
Oh, wow.
So with that comes huge amounts of water storage on floodplains, which can be negative if you've got other things on floodplains you want to do. Actually, the basic role of a floodplain to store water. It's the reason why floodplains are formed, because of the water storage, the overflow onto them. So it's a more natural floodplain environment that you'll see. You can also see trees that have been felled, or trees that have been gnawed or in the process of being felled. If that's not desirable for you, you can protect those trees. So that's another management intervention that's straightforward. You might see canals that beavers have excavated to access food resources further away from deep water. They're very adept at creating those canals, building dams on the downslope side, and then using them to float wood or branches that they've coppiced, they've gnawed, back to where they want to feed. You might see lodges which essentially look like huge piles of sticks. And if you're very quiet and you stand next to a lodge in the daytime, you can sometimes hear the beavers within.
Oh, wow.
Food, or sometimes even making these kind of snoring noises, or these little noises that the young kits, the baby beavers, make. Yeah, so there's a whole host of beaver signs. I mean, I would direct people to the Science and Evidence report from the River Otter Beaver Trial that we published this year, because that not only describes all the science, but it describes a lot of these impacts, all these things that you can see if you want to go looking for beavers in the landscape, or looking for evidence of beavers in the landscape.
Brilliant, thank you. And what do you hope to see in the future as these populations grow?
Well, what we will undoubtedly see in the River Otter is populations expanding, more territories being established, more opportunities therefore for people to go wildlife watching to see these large iconic animals. I mean, they're the first native mammal to be reintroduced in the UK ever.
Wow.
So, you know, for wildlife watchers and the wildlife experience, it's really pretty special, pretty unique. So we would hope to see more places where that can happen as the beaver populations expand in the River Otter. We're likely to see those beavers moving over the hill, so into adjacent catchments, which are the Axe, the Tone, the Colne, the Clyst, maybe even into the Exe River Basin in the fullness of time. That may not be for some years, but these animals do travel, and they do so to look for mates and try and find new territories to establish better habitat for themselves. So I would imagine that we'll see expansion both within the River Otter catchment and further. I think nationally we're awaiting Natural England's recommendation to DEFRA, and therefore we are awaiting decisions from the Secretary of State for the Environment as to the national strategy for beaver reintroduction. I think what I would like to see in that area is more reintroductions of these animals into places where they can do good. Overwhelmingly, we've found that the benefits of beaver introduction far outweigh the costs. And so I would like to see, for that reason alone, more beaver reintroductions in a wild sense into many more catchments in England, and therefore allowing society to reap the benefits and the rewards. I think alongside that, though, I would like to see coherent national management strategies put in place by government and indeed funded by government to make sure that any of these conflicts that I alluded to earlier are dealt with swiftly. And what we see is a more positive side to this beaver introduction as opposed to dealing with challenges and problems.
Yeah, brilliant. And just finally, I was going to ask, what are the next stages of the project? You've talked about expansion there. Do you have other areas in mind, or are you mostly going to be monitoring the existing ones to see how they go?
We will continue to monitor in the River Otter catchment, but at the same time, and in fact before that even started, we had been and we are monitoring beavers in a whole range of other locations in Cornwall and Devon, new locations such as Plymouth, where there's going to be the first urban beaver introduction in a few weeks' time. Rewilding locations such as Knepp, again in a few weeks' time there's going to be beavers reintroduced there, and we've been studying the pre-beaver baseline, if you like, for the last 3 years to understand what the change is going to be. Forestry Commission sites like the Forest of Dean and Pickering, where we're already working to understand impacts of beavers in these places. Really pretty well everywhere in the UK that beavers live, we're doing work to do the science, to do the research, to understand their impacts. So yeah, for us that's continuing work. There's 7 people now in my in the part of my research group that focuses on beavers. New PhD students starting in a couple of weeks, another one just been advertised to start in a couple of months. So that area of research is really growing. We are not short of opportunities to learn more.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well, that sounds great for the future. And thanks very much for coming to talk to us about that today. I hope everyone's enjoyed listening about the project. And we'll see you again very soon.
All right. Thanks very much, Emma.